Next to the pleasure which the earnest zoologist derives from studying the habits and structure of living animals, and his intelligent appreciation of their perfect adaptation to their modes of life and the circumstances in which they are placed, is the interest he feels in eliminating fiction from truth, while comparing the fancies of the past with the facts of the present. As his knowledge increases, he learns that the descriptions by ancient writers of so-called fabulous creatures are rather distorted portraits than invented falsehoods, and that there is hardly one of the monsters of old which does not have its prototype in nature today. The idea of the Lernaean Hydra, whose heads grew again when cut off by Hercules, originated, as I have shown in another chapter, in a knowledge of the octopus, and in the form and movements of other animals with which we are now familiar. We may, in like manner, recognize the similitude and archetype of the mermaid. But we must search deeply into the history of mankind to discover the real source of a belief that has prevailed in almost all ages and in all parts of the world: the existence of a race of beings uniting the form of man with that of a fish. A mere resemblance between these creatures of imagination and certain aquatic animals is not sufficient to account for that belief. It probably had its origin in ancient mythologies and in the sculptures and pictures associated with them, which were designed to represent certain attributes of the deities of various nations. In the course of time, the meanings of these were lost, and subsequent generations regarded as portraits of existing beings the effigies which were at first intended to be merely emblematic and symbolical. Early idolatry consisted, first, in separating the idea of the one divinity into that of his various attributes, and inventing symbols and making images of each separately. Secondly, in the worship of the sun, moon, stars, and planets as living entities. And thirdly, in the deification of ancestors and early kings. These three forms were often mingled together in strange and tangled confusion. Amongst the famous personages whose histories were transmitted by oral tradition was Noah. He was known as the second father of the human race and the preserver and teacher of the arts and sciences as they existed before the Great Deluge, of which so many distinct traditions exist among various races of mankind. Consequently, he became an object of worship in many countries and under many names. His wife and sons, as his assistants in the diffusion of knowledge, were sometimes associated with him. According to Berosus of Babylon, the Chaldean priest and astronomer who extracted from the sacred books of that great city much ancient lore, which he introduced into his history of Syria, written around 260 BC for the Greeks. At a time when men were sunk in barbarism, there came up from the Erythraean Sea, the Persian Gulf, and landed on the Babylonian shore a creature named Can, which had the body and head of a fish. But above the fish's head was the head of a man, and below the tail of the fish were human feet. It also had human arms, a human voice, and spoke human language. This strange monster sojourned among the rude people during the day, taking no food, but retiring to the sea at night. It continued for some time to visit them, teaching them the arts of civilized life and instructing them in science and religion. In this tale, we have a distorted account of the life and occupation of Noah after his escape from the deluge that destroyed his home and drowned his neighbors. Ken was one of the names under which he was worshipped in Chaldea, at Erech, the place of the ark, as the sacred and intelligent fish god, the teacher of mankind, the god of science and knowledge. There he was also called Oes, Hoa, Ea, Ana, Anu, Aun, and On. Noah was also worshipped in Syria, Mesopotamia, and in Egypt at Populus No, or Thebes, so named from Theba, meaning the ark. The history of the coffin of Osiris is another version of Noah's Ark, and the period during which that Egyptian divinity is said to have been shut up in it, after it was set afloat upon the waters, was precisely the same as the time Noah remained in the ark. Dagon, sometimes called Otakon, the great fish god of the Philistines and Babylonians, was another phase of Can. Dag in Hebrew signifies a male fish, and Aun and On were two of the names of Noah. Dagon, or Dagon, therefore means the fish Noah. He was portrayed in two ways. The older image depicted a man issuing from a fish, as described of Oannes by Berosus, but in later times, this evolved into a figure whose upper half was human and whose lower half was that of a fish. The image of Dagon that fell before the ark of the God of Israel was probably of this later form, for we read that, in its fall, the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump, in the margin, the fishy part, of Dagon was left to him. This was evidently Milton's conception of him. Dagon his name, sea monster, upward man and downward fish. In some of the Nineveh sculptures of the fish god, the head of the fish forms a kind of mitre on the man's head, while the fish's body appears as a cloak or cape over his shoulders and back. The fish varies in length. In some cases, the tail almost touches the ground. In others, it reaches only slightly below the man's waist. In one of his avatars, or incarnations, the god Vishnu, the preserver, is represented as issuing from the mouth of a fish. He is celebrated as having miraculously preserved one righteous family, and also the Vedas, the sacred records, when the world was drowned. Not only is this legend of the Indian god entwined with the history of Noah, but Vishnu and Noah share the same name, Vishnu being the Sanskrit form of Ishna, meaning the man Noah. The word avatar also means out of the boat. In fact, the entire mythology of Greece and Rome, as well as that of Asia, is filled with stories of the history and deeds of Noah, which are impossible to misunderstand. In all representations of a deity with a combined human and fish-like form, the original idea was that of a person coming out of a fish, not being part of one, but issuing from it, as Noah emerged from the ark. In all of them, the fish symbolized preservation, fecundity, plenty, and the diffusion of knowledge. As the image was not the effigy of a divine personage but symbolized certain divine attributes, its sex was comparatively unimportant. However, it is possible that, combined with the fecundity of the fish, the idea of Noah's wife as the second mother of all subsequent generations, according to widespread traditions of the deluge, may have influenced the impersonation. Atargatis, the famed goddess of the Syrians, was also a fish divinity. Her image, like that of Dagon, originally had a fish's body with human extremities protruding from it, but over centuries it was gradually transformed into a figure with the upper body of a woman and the lower half of a fish. Gaddis was a powerful queen of Sidon and mother of Semiramis. She received the title Ater or Ater, meaning the Great, for the benefits she conferred on her people, one of which was the strict conservation of their fisheries, protecting them both from their own overuse and from foreign interference. She issued an edict that no fish should be eaten without her consent and that no one should fish in the neighboring sea without a license from her. It is not improbable that she and her famous daughter, who, according to Ovid and others, was the builder of the walls of Babylon, were worshipped together. That Atargatis was the same as the fish goddess Ashtaroth or Ashtoreth, the builder of the encompassing wall, is supported by multiple proofs, including one from biblical history. In 1 Maccabees 5:43-44, we read, "All the heathen being discomfited before him, Judas Maccabeus, cast away their weapons and fled unto the temple that was at Carnaim. But they took the city and burned the temple with all that were therein. Thus was Carnaim subdued, neither could they stand any longer before Judas." In 2 Maccabees 12:26, we are told, "Maccabeus marched forth to Carnaim, and to the temple of Atargatis, and there he slew 25,000 persons." In Genesis 14 verse 5, this city and temple are referred to as Ashtaroth Carnaim. Figure 7 is a representation of Atargatis on a metal coined at Marseilles. It shows that when the Phoenician colony from Syria, by whom that city was founded, settled there, they brought with them the worship of the gods of their country. Atargatis was worshipped by the Greeks as Derceto and Astarte. Lucian writes, "In Phoenicia I saw the image of Derceto, a strange sight, truly.